Our next speaker is Boris Escalante. Boris is a senior researcher here at UNAM. He holds a PhD from the Technical University of Eindhoven in the Netherlands, and he currently coordinates the Advanced Laboratory in Image Processing, or Laboratorio Avanzado de Procesamiento de Imágenes here. And he's also part of the Centro Virtual de la Computación at UNAM. His research interests comprise computational models of human vision and their applications to digital image processing. Welcome, Boris.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I know I'm very lucky for being here for the second time. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm gonna tell a story which is actually like a love story. Okay, I entitled this presentation "Visual Perception Reconciles with Deep Learning." So, okay. I just want to say brief words about what computer vision is in the words of David Marr. I think David Marr was the father of computer vision. So he says vision goal is to produce a useful description of the outside world free of irrelevant information. Closer to the current days, Jan Goodfellow says that computers are so powerful now that they can defeat even the best chess player, but it's very difficult for them to accomplish relatively simple tasks like object recognition. That's the problem of computer vision. We are dealing with tasks that for us, human beings, are very easy, but for computers are very difficult. So but what the challenge today is really scene understanding. So that's why I am depicting here a picture in which we can imagine that if we submit this image to an intelligent system, maybe the system will be able to localize, recognize, detect an object, but what is concerned with scene understanding is a different story, because we as humans would say that immediately after looking at this image that it comes from the Day of the Dead, which is something that only happens in Mexico, that there's a calaca with a skull there, and it appears that it's rising from below the ground. And what it means, a computer might say, okay, this object that looks like a person is chopped to half. Is this a happy picture? Is it a dramatic picture? What it is? So that part of understanding is really the challenge of today's computer vision problems. Now, when we are able to deal with this problem, we can imagine that we would be able to solve difficult problems. We work a lot with medical imaging. That's why I'm showing this slide, because in medical images, we try to build tools that are an aid for diagnosis for physicians. So we can imagine that the wrong decision in this area could be very, very dramatic. But to start with the story, I want to start with David Hubble. David Hubble won the Nobel Prize in 1981 because of his work around the 50s, in which he discovered that in the primary visual cortex, we have simple and complex cells whose task is to detect basic features like lines, edges, orientation, motion. Even they can detect depth in stereoscopic images. Okay. Now, some people like Witkin, Kunderik in the 80s took these discoveries to build representation models for image processing, image representation. I think one of the most important was the scale space theory. That says that an image can be represented at multi-resolution and multi-scale, at different scales, by means of filtering with a Gaussian function. Further, in 1999, probably many of you know SIFT. SIFT is a very successful way to model images based on the detection of features. These are this model is very useful to, for instance, identify similar object, the same object in different scenes. This work was very much based on the works by Hubble in the 1950s. In the 80s, also, Marcelli and Dockman found out that the Gabor functions are very good models of those cells that Hubble found in the 1950s. And then we started doing image processing based in mathematical models that model these Gabor functions. Later, in 1981, Martins developed the Hermite transform, which is something similar to the Gabor transform, that is also based on a model for early vision, which is the Gaussian derivative model. What I want you to see is at the left part, we have the filters of this transform. And at the right part, you have what the filters provide when they convolve an image. And what you see in the right images is that what these filters provide are lines, are edges, are corners, are those basic patterns that Hubble found in 1950s. So we were happy until then. Perception still rules. I mean, perception still was the rule to follow until some other people came with the data-intensive models. So these people forgot everything we knew about perception, and they say, okay, I don't mind, and we're going to do computing-intensive calculations. And I'm just putting this example because it's very nice. I like it very much. Eigen faces. Eigen faces is a way to describe a bunch of images. You see this database is made of important people. Maybe you recognize some of them. And what they do is they just do a PCA, a principal component analysis expansion, and at the right side we have the eigenvectors, which are in this case called eigenfaces. And what you see is that the above eigenfaces are the most important. And what they show is, again, but important patterns like edges, lines, corners, and so on. The same things that we know are important for visual perception. Okay, we were not very much worried on those days still. We knew that neural network existed for a long time, and suddenly some people started using neural networks to process images. And the argument was that the neural networks emulate human neurons, but okay, but I think they're emulating the back end of a brain, not the front end, which is visual perception. So you have here a fully connected network, and the idea was, we have an image, an input image, and we would have for every pixel an input. So we have millions of inputs going to a fully connected network, and to optimize this is crazy. In those days, it was really crazy. So people who like me, who did image processing, believed that this would never be a success, until it became a success. Okay. What happened? Well, this challenge, this large-scale visual challenge, that has to do with a classification task. And so what you have here, maybe you know this graph, but what you have is we have the error. These are the error rates for different models. And we saw that from 2011 to 2014, the error rate went down. Even in 2015 and 2016, the error rate was smaller than the human performance. So at this point, we really had to look at it and see, okay, it's working. Now, the question is, why is it working? Why do deep neural networks work so well? That's the question that people like me who come from the old school want to that somebody answers. Yeah? Okay, so is it because of this? I mean, the algorithms have always been there. Okay, we have now more computer power. That's been definitely a revolution. You have lots of data. And that has indeed made neural networks work. But are these the things that have made deep neural networks work so well? I don't think so. The revolution is, as probably most of you know, is that they came out with a new model, which are the convolutional neural networks. And some people may say that the convolutional part, somebody thought of that because it made more efficient the calculations and so on. But from my point of view, what happened is, in a convolutional neural networks, what happens is a convolution part. What's convolution is filtering, okay? Then there's pooling, max pooling, which is an elegant form of subsampling. There's another convolution, there's max pooling, so on, so on. That is multi-resolution in terms of classical image processing. Yeah. So furthermore, when we see the feature maps, what are the feature maps? The feature maps are the results of the filters within the convolutional networks. So when we see the filter maps, we see again that filter maps resemble again the outputs of traditional filters. They react to line, to edges. My God, 5 minutes, okay. And so it's consistent with the traditional model. Even more, if we see how the filter responses of these networks look like, if we see what images they respond with most energy, these filters, we see that the features that react the best with these filters are, again, lines, edges, and so on. These guys in 2018 published a paper in which they showed that the filters for the AlexNet, which are at the upper part of the slide, resemble very much the filters at the bottom side, which are the Gabor filters, the old Gabor filters from the 90s, 80s. So inspired in this discovery, they work with the Gabor filters. We work with the Hermite filters, which are the model we work with. And we propose, a Hermite convolutional neural network. So this is where the reconciliation starts. We're trying to make convolution networks in which the convolution filters are driven by visual perception models. That's what we are trying to do. So this is that's why I'm saying this is reconciliation. We're trying to build convolutional neural networks with a visual perception basis or approach. Just to speed up the speech, the basic idea is that in a traditional convolutional network, you have a bunch of filters that have to adjust through the optimization process, which it goes with the optimization, the gradient, the backpropagation, and so on, so on, so on. And you have to adjust a bunch of filters. In our proposals, what we try to do is propose a reduced number of filters that go through a modulation, and this modulation is done with Hermite functions. So we just adjust a limited number of filters, modulating with those perceptually relevant filters, and produce the bunch of filters that are typically in a CNN. That's the proposal in very basic words. So we change a bit the paradigm of the convolutional part in a network. The rest of the architecture is very similar. For instance, we have here a ResNet structure, and we just change the convolutional part with what I just showed and see what happened. So when we tested our method with CIFAR 10 and CIFAR 100 and also with MNIST, I'm just going to show the results very briefly. At the left part, we have different architectures. All architectures that start with a G means Gabor, so that's a visual perceptual model. The ones with H are our model, the Hermite convolutions. At the top, we have the typical ResNet, and then we have here the error rates for CIFAR 10, CIFAR 100. And I'm not going through this with detail, but I just want to stress one thing, that if we compare similar error rates, for instance, the ones at red, and see the number of parameters that these networks have, which is this, for instance, there's not a point, but we have here an error of 5.3 and 3.5 million parameters. That performance can be obtained with traditional models with many more parameters. So what I'm saying is that by doing this, we reduce the number of parameters, we achieve similar performance results, and we make the network much more efficient. That's the story behind it. I mean, it's just perfect. Okay. So I'm just going to conclude with the things I think are important here. Convolution stages in CNNs, what they do is extract the primitive features the same way that our retinal and cortical cells do in human vision. That's something that I think most people would agree. Second, learn filters in CNN, which you know, learn filters are obtained after a computational intensive procedure. They come out to be very similar to the profiles that we have in the cortical cells of our human perceptual system. And last, that by introducing these models that we propose, and those guys I mentioned also proposed, which consisted on modulating learn filters with these perceptually relevant filters, you obtain more efficient networks that perform similar to much more complex networks. So, thank you very much.